So again, welcome back. Just to recap what we've gone through so far in the fundamentals track and leading up to where we're going to talk about some alerting best practices. So we started off the day with Phil walked you through how to instrument an app. We took a glitch app and cloned it, and it's a Food Me app. It's a food ordering service, and we cloned it, and then we went through the steps to add New Relic agents so that we could get the data reporting into the New Relic database. And then we walked through just looking at some of the basic performance data that's being loaded by default into New Relic. And we built some dashboards. We learned a little bit about dashboards and NRQL, the New Relic query language, sometimes referred to as NERQL. And then in the last session, Phil walked you through how to do some custom instrumentation. So beyond the default data that gets reported in through by default from our agents, we went in and we added some custom instrumentation into the browser and into the APM data, so that we were capturing specifically not just the performance data, the response time, and number of transactions, but we decided we were going to capture some order data, like the number, the order total, the customer, the restaurant name, and some things like that. Now, if you haven't been here the whole time and you haven't been able to build out the app, following along with us, we will. I will put the credentials. Actually, I don't have them in my browser. I will do that in just a second. I'll put the credentials for following along in the app. Actually, bear with me 1 second while I do that. I need to switch all the way back to, give me a second here so I can copy and paste. I got to remember where I put it. Here. All right. I'm going to put this in the chat so that if you want to follow along without being in your own account, you can follow along in the, I can't talk and type at the same time. Bear with me 1 second here. All right. Here we go. Okay. So if you don't have an account if you weren't creating with us all along and you don't have an account to follow along, you can log into the New Relic University, learn at newrelicuniversity.com training account using the password Citrus Geologist, and that will allow you to follow along with the labs that we're doing today. And this particular session is going to be almost all labs. We're just going to be doing this stuff together. We're going to build some alert policies. I'm going to start with a slide where I'm going to talk about some alert terminology just to sort of orient you, and then I'm going to wrap it up with a slide and talk about some alerts best practices. But in between, I'm going to try to fit in about 4 or 5 labs so that you get your hands on, because this is a session that's normally a lot longer when we do it through New Relic University. So I'm trying to fit a lot into the 50 minutes that we've got. So with that, let's jump straight into it. So let's start with some terminology. In New Relic, so let's just go through the whole summary of what I just talked about, what we just did. So you've got this app now, you've got data reporting into the New Relic database, and you can build some dashboards to look at some things, but you're not always necessarily looking at those dashboards. You want to be alerted, you want to be notified, possibly. We'll talk about notifications, but you want to be alerted when there is an issue, or maybe it's not an issue. Maybe you want to know, there was something that Phil mentioned in an earlier session. Maybe you want to know when you got your first big order, the first time you got an order that's more than $50 because you're a startup. Your Food Me app is a startup, and you've been getting a lot of $5 and $10 orders, and you want to know when you finally hit that $50 order. Now, that's not necessarily best practice, because we'll talk about that later. You want alerts to be something that are actionable, because what are you going to do? So you got a notification about this $50 order, but okay, what do you want to do with that? So we'll wrap up this session talking about what are some best practices for alerting, but how you define an alert, it starts with a policy. So you have a policy that is a container, so to speak, for 1 or more conditions. Actually, technically, it's 0 or more conditions, because you'll see when we start, you can create a policy, and when you first create it, it has no conditions in it. It's not going to be very useful to you with no conditions in it, but you can create a policy with no conditions. But best practice, you should at least have 1 condition in your alert policy. So a policy contains 1 or more conditions. And a condition, it describes a data source. You're monitoring a data source. So I think host or an app, or for example, we're going to be looking at our FoodMe app today. So it's a data source and a behavior that you want to monitor, and you set a threshold on that behavior. So maybe let's say it was a host. Maybe it's if your CPU exceeds 50% or some target, some target number that you want to monitor. So a condition is monitoring a data source and looking at a specific, and it combines a threshold. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat. I saw some notes in the chat. Looks like Phil's got it. Okay. Phil, let me know if I need to respond to anything. I can't read and talk at the same time, but it looks like you got them. Okay. Sorry, I got distracted I saw the chat moving in my peripheral vision. I had to turn and look. So where was I? Oh, so yeah. So the threshold, so a condition is going to specify a monitor behavior, and there's going to be a threshold setting. And the threshold is the critical setting that will trigger a violation. So in that example that I was giving earlier, where I said maybe you're the host that you're monitoring, and you want to monitor the CPU. If it exceeds greater than 80% or something like that, that would be your threshold. And then when that threshold is triggered, when there's a violation, when you hit that critical setting, then that's going to create a violation that may or may not create an incident. We've got warning violations and critical violations, and only critical violations at present create an incident. That's something that's going to be changing pretty soon. I don't have a date on that, but that's something that's going to be changing in the near future. And then so once you've got a critical violation, then it's going to create an incident, and the notifications will be sent out. And then you have notification channels that are who you're going to notify and how you're going to notify them. So that could be just a user message in the app, or it could be an email or a Slack message to a Slack channel, or something, assuming we have time to get to it today, it could be a webhook. So for example, we have had a customer who wanted to notify everybody through Microsoft Teams. And so they had to accomplish that using a webhook. So that's an example of how you might use that. For today's purposes, again, assuming we get to the bonus lab, that we're just going to report it to a web page so that we can monitor the status. But we'll get to that as our bonus lab at the end. Now, I went through those terms pretty quickly. They will become clearer as we go through the labs, because like I said, pretty much from this point till the last, till the end of the session, we're just going to be doing lab after lab. We're going to basically go in and create a policy, add some conditions with thresholds. We're going to look at some violations, et cetera, et cetera. But I am going to pause because I know sometimes I talk really fast. So I'm going to pause and glance at the chat to see if there are any questions. Okay, so I saw a question about the slides, and looks like Phil posted that. And the recordings, all of these sessions for Data Nerd Days are being recorded. I'm not sure how the recording link is going to be communicated out. I think it will be available on Hopin for the next 3 days, but then eventually it will just be hosted by New Relic. I don't know that URL. I assume that you will get an email or something with that link, but I don't know. I don't know, Phil, if you know the answer off the top of your head. I don't know if we've got our moderators on who might be able to answer that question, but they are being recorded, and that information will be provided publicly in some way. I just don't know what that is. Let's see if I've got any other questions. Okay, Phil answered the question about the password. Okay, all right, so let's get into it. So like I said, we're just gonna jump straight in doing some labs. Now I'm gonna walk you through the first couple of steps, actually in this case for this particular lab, the first step to just create a policy so you can follow along with me. Then I'm gonna come back to this slide. So I'm gonna switch away from the slide to go show you how to do the step one, which is to create the policy. And then I'll switch back to this slide and give you some time to work on step number 2 on your own. And then I will come back and do it as, so you can follow along in case you didn't finish. And then that's how we'll do all the labs through this session. All right, so let's come back over here. So I'm in my New Relic one. I'm on the home page right now. So you may still be on the dashboard screen depending on where you were when you last left. But we're going to go over to the main menu. We're going to go to Alerts and AI, and we're going to go down to Policies. And depending on, Yeah, we happen to have New York University happens to be running we do a 2-day FSO full stack observability course that happens to be running at the same time as Data Nerd Days. So there's a bunch of policies out here already. I cleaned these out last night, so it was empty just this morning. But so there's a bunch of policies that are out here because there's another course that's running right now. So this is why it's going to be important. Again, if you were in our earlier sessions, we talked about naming at that time it was dashboards with your initials at the beginning so that you could find yours. So for these, when we create these policies, you'll want to name it with your initials so that you can find them, because you're going to add conditions to your policies as we go through these labs, and you want to be able to find yours. I'm laughing because we often say we want to make the naming family friendly if you're in this in the same account as the rest of us, because again, you might be doing this in your own, and I'm laughing that somebody took it literally and named theirs family friendly. So anyway, keep in mind, you could be in your own account. If you are in your own account, you may come to this screen. If you go to alerts, again, the way I got there was alerts, and then I went down to policies. If you're in your own account and you've never created a policy, it's going to be a screen that just sort of says something like welcome. And you have to scroll down, and there's a button that says create your first policy. So your screen may look a little bit different because I already have policies in this particular account. I am in again, if you're following along with me, I am in the NRU training account. And that's where we want to create these policies. You wouldn't, if you're logging in as learn@newrelicuniversity.com, you wouldn't have permissions to create policies in any of these other accounts. So you want to make sure that you're in the NRU training account, and we're going to click on create new policies. So that's where we're going to start. And again, you want to name it. I'm going to name mine, well, it would help if I could type. It's getting late on the East Coast. My tongue is getting tied. RLF Data Nerd Days policy. Okay. And I probably should have called it Food Me, because we're specifically going to be working with the Food Me app. And actually, I'm probably going to steal the URL from Phil's Food Me app. We'll see when we get to the actual policies. So we're gonna create an alert policy. You're gonna give it a name, and for the purposes of, I don't think I specify. I'm looking at the text for the lab. I don't think I particularly specify what the incident preference should be. I will give a quick summary because, again, just in the interest of time, I don't really have a whole lot of time to go into all the detail here, but we're going to choose by policy. If you're reading this screen, from top to bottom, it goes from least noisy to most noisy. So by policy is going to group all of your notifications for everything in all of the conditions and all of the signals in one single one alert, one incident. If you do it by condition, then if you've got a policy that has 5 conditions, then you could have 5 different alerts open or notifications open at once, incidents open at once. If you do it by condition and signal, then if you've got a policy with 5 conditions, and each condition, let's say it was by host and you've got 100 hosts, that could be up to 500 because it's by condition and signal. So each host, you could have 500. So, it gets more noisy the further you go down the page. There's very valid reasons why you would do by condition and signal versus by policy. But again, I don't know if we've got I'll look while you guys are working on the, actually, you know what, at the end of this session, I'm going to give you a best practices guide. There's an explanation in there in terms of when you're thinking about how you set up your alerts and your alert policies and conditions, when you want to do which. So it's going to go into way more detail than we've got time for here. So for the purposes of this lab, just click by policy, and then you're going to click on create alert. And so that's going to get you here. So this is where remember I said a policy is a container for, that contains 1 or more conditions. Technically it's 0 more, because now I've got a policy that has 0 conditions in it. And so we're going to want to create our first condition. So you would click on create condition. I'm not going to do that here because I want to give you this lab to work on your own for a few minutes. And then I'll work through it with you so you can follow along. But I want to give you the opportunity to try it on your own first. So I want you to try to do number 2 on this slide, which is you're going to add some conditions. We're going to add a condition where we want to take a look at our APM backend Apdex. And I mentioned earlier, if you were here earlier, that Apdex is an industry standard score for measuring user satisfaction. The values go from 0 to 1, 1 being good. So if it drops below 1, then it's slightly less ideal than 1. So 0.85 could be pretty bad. Well, it really depends on the app in terms of what's the right value for you. Again, the best practices guide that I'm going to share at the end of this session goes into more about how to think through those things. But I want you to add a condition that's going to monitor your Apdex score if it drops below 0.85 for 5 minutes. And I also want you to add a warning. And again, I'm not going to show you this first. I want you to try it on your own, and then I will walk through it. And then I also want you to add a condition for browser page load time for if it goes over 2 seconds. So I will shut up for a few minutes and let you work on that, and then I'll come back and show you how to do that. And as always, if you have any questions, post those in the chat. All right, so I know it's only been a few minutes. I just want to check in to see if anybody needs more time or if you're ready for me to start working through these steps. And it's funny because I always ask that question and then I wonder if people are busy doing the lab and they don't have time to type in the chat to let me know that they need more time. So it's a delicate balance. All right, I'm gonna, there's actually something I want to show you before we get into the steps. So I'm gonna switch from the slide. Okay, good to go. Thank you, Nezzy. So one of the things that I meant, I had a, hold on, let me copy this link. I had a dashboard that I wanted to show you. All right, let me show you this. So, we did dashboards in 2 of the earlier sessions. And I would say that before you start creating alerts, and we'll talk about ways to create alerts if you've got a brand new app and you don't know what the threshold should be. That's going to be one of the labs we're going to get to in just a minute. But if you've already created a dashboard and you're starting to look at your performance, then that might be something that's going to tip you off in terms of what your thresholds might be. So you may start to set and start to look at what your performance is looking like, and then start to notice some peaks and then think, hey, you know what? I want to be alerted when something like this happens. Now, there's a shortcut to doing that. You can, if you're looking at a chart, like a chart on a dashboard, or if you're looking at one of the curated views, so if you're in APM or browser and you see a chart and you think, hey, you know, I'm noticing there's some issues here, maybe I want to keep an eye on that. There is a way to shortcut the process of having to create it from scratch, which is you can go to the three little dots in the upper right-hand corner, and you can say create alert condition. And I forgot who I'm logged in as. I don't have the permissions to do it. Am I not in? Oh yeah, this is in my, I stole somebody else's dashboard. Let me see, let's find a dashboard that I actually have permissions for. Let's go to the one that Phil created earlier. Sorry, Phil, I didn't tell you I was going to steal this. I think you called it something about Data Nerd Days. Let's see. Well, there was the one that I did, but there was one that Phil did, I thought. Where did it go? Let's see, let's go over to the training account, New Relic training account. And there it is. Oh no, it was Food Me, never mind. So if you're looking at a dashboard, back to where I was, now I just want to show you, this isn't going to show the exact, the same performance condition I was going to show you, but you can click on create alert condition, and that's going to open this slide out window, and it's going to create because again, we learned earlier about NRQL, it's going to create an alert based on the NRQL behind that particular chart. So that's a quick shortcut way to do it. And then what you would do is at the bottom, after we're going to go through all of these steps in just a second, but at the bottom, you would pick which alert or which policy you want to add that to. So that's how you would do that. But I just wanted to point that out because we're, again, similar to what we did with dashboards. There's shortcuts to be able to do things quicker, but we're going to start with a blank piece of paper so that you can learn how to do it from scratch. So we're going to click on create a condition, and now I've got to see if I can remember what the lab said. Oh, we're going to do an APM condition. We're doing if the backend AppDex drops below 0.85. So we're going to do APM. We're going to choose application metric. We're going to select our entities. And we're doing Food Me. And actually, again, I want to see, let's still Phil's app. Well, actually, you know what? For the purposes of this, I think I might get a little bit more data for the other Food Me app. So we're going to click on, I'm debating which one to use. Let's do them both. No, I'm going to do Food Me. Use, again, if you're following along in my account or in the New Relic University account, use Food Me. If you're in your own account, use whatever the entity name is that you defined when you created your app. And so by default, because it's sorted by key metrics and then I think alphabetical, you're going to see AppDex already there, but you can click on that drop down and you can pick other. I see a question. What if we have several new apps coming online? How can they inherit an alert profile? Inherit the alert profile. Well, that's actually a great question. Let me go back for a second. So let's say, for example, all those apps that you've got, they share some value. You can have labels. So for example, you can have a label for environment. So maybe all your dev apps or all your production apps or staging. Or if there's some other, like if there's a team name, or here's an example. So we've got an attribute for a team. So if they're all your e-commerce. So if they share attributes that you can use you can label them, then you can do you can select your entities based on a label as opposed to explicitly picking an application. So John, hopefully that answers your question for you. But for the purpose of this one, yeah, you're good. So for the purpose of this one, we're going to specifically pick Food Me, but you could do it more dynamically by using labels as an example. All right, so I was pointing out that You're going to see AppDex is already there, but I just wanted to point out that there is a drop down there to pick other metrics that you could monitor. For this particular lab, we're doing AppDex, and we're saying if the score drops below, I think what was it, 0.85, and we're doing it for 5 minutes. So you can do for at least or at least once in. For this particular one, we're going to do for at least 5 minutes. And then I said, put a warning threshold. So the red X is a critical threshold. The yellow triangle, or exclamation point in the triangle, is for a warning threshold. So if it goes below 8.85, then that's critical. But maybe I want to know if it goes below 0.9. And that's going to be my warning. And what you see is, you may have noticed, though, this chart over here changed, and it's basically telling me that in the last, what is it looking at? Looks like the last 3 hours. I had to look at the clock. That there would have been one. You can see this yellow arrow. There would have been one warning violation in that time frame. There wouldn't have been a critical. If there were, let's see. I'll show you what it looks like if I'd done critical. So let's go lower with. Let's see this at, let's make this 0.99 just for a second. Well, okay, fine. Oops, I put 2 points, that's why. So I want to just show you, if I went 0.9, see how it turned, it's red. So if it's showing you when there would have been either a critical violation or a warning violation. I'm gonna put this back the way it was. So with my current settings, at 0.85 for critical and 0.9 for warning, there would have been a warning threshold violation in that time, but no critical. So I just wanted to point that out. So I think that was all for that. Okay, so I'm going to click on create condition. Did I name it yet? I was going to name it in the next screen. Or did I forget to name it? I was busy running my mouth and I forgot to name it. Let's give it a meaningful name. Actually, I could have done it in that same screen. Let's go back for a second. I can do it from right here. Clicking on this little pencil here. I want to call that AppDex low, less than 0.85. And again, this is something we'll talk about, best practices, is you want to name your condition something meaningful so that when you're getting those notifications that, it's just telling me AppDex low, okay, but how low? So make them as meaningful as possible. And I'm going to say, how about I say food me AppDex low, because this one was specifically for food me. So you want to be as specific as possible without being too overly verbose when you're naming your condition. So that's the first part of step one, or step number 2. So I asked you to do 2 conditions. The first one was for the AppDex score. The second one was for browser page load time. So I am going to add a new condition. So that's over here, over on the right. You see the little button says add new condition. And I'm going to click on browser, and I'm going to do metric. I'm going to select my entities. And again, for the purposes of this, I am going to choose food me. And next. And what was I doing? Page load, 2 seconds. Okay. So I'm going to look in my drop-down list for total page load. And if it is above, in this case, I want to know if the page load is taking too long. So if it's above 2 seconds, and instead of saying for at least 5 minutes, at this time, I'm going to say at least once in 5 minutes. So if at least one time in 5 minutes, I've got a long page load time, then I want to know. And I'll do a warning condition if it's, let's see, what would I set my warning as? 1.5 maybe? At least once in 5 minutes. And we're going to call this total page. We're again, food me. This is what I skipped last time because I was running my mouth, which was the naming of it. Food me, total page load high, greater than 2 seconds. Let's do that. And that's going to create that condition. So now I've got a policy. So I've got this new policy just monitoring the performance of my food me application. And I've got a couple of conditions that exist in there. So now that I've done that, I want to go back and talk to you again about, just to reiterate, the incident preferences. So again, up here, remember at the beginning, we set this to by policy. If I had done a by condition, then I would get one alert or one open incident each time any one of those conditions was violated. So as it stands right now, if either of these conditions is violated, then I'm going to have an open condition or an open incident. And if the other, so let's say the page load goes high, then that's going to open the incident. And if at the, like 2 seconds later or a minute later or whatever, while that's still open, if the AppDex score goes low, I'm still just going to have that one incident. So if I do it by policy, it's all the conditions in that policy are going to be rolled into one incident. But if I do it by condition, then if either of these violates, then I would get an incident open. And when the other one violated, I would get another incident open. So I just wanted to go back to talk about that. And again, there's a third option, which is by condition and signal. So back to the example where John was asking if he had multiple apps and he wanted to monitor those, and you did it by label. So maybe I did it for all of my e-commerce applications. I did a condition or a policy for all my e-commerce applications with multiple conditions. Anytime any one of those entities, one of those data sources violates a condition, I'm going to get an incident open. So I can have lots and lots of incidents open. So just wanted to go back and reiterate, now that you see what a policy looks like and a condition looks like, what those incident preferences are all about. All right, so let me pause and see if there are any questions on any of that. Looks like no. All right. So now, and this is why I mentioned it earlier, I said, what if you had a new app and you weren't sure exactly what what's a good baseline? I'm sort of giving away the answer in the question, but you've got some unpredictable apps. So in this scenario, we've got our front end developers are starting to make use of AJAX calls for the client server connections to a minimum and improving the perceived performance. And the team is still experimenting with AJAX, and they want to keep doing that. So there's no clear performance threshold yet, but we want to be notified when the AJAX response time deviates from some historical average. So we don't know exactly what we want those thresholds to be, but we want to be monitored if it's deviating in some way from what we've seen as just sort of like what again, I keep giving away the answer in the question, but deviating from the baseline. So we're going to create a condition for, we're going to go back to the browser category. We're going to create a metric baseline condition. So you're going to say, well, if my AJAX response time is, you can choose upper or lower. If it's greater than 30 or 3 minutes, from the historical average, then you want to get an alert. So I'm only going to give you just because it's one step in this app or in this lab. I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to do this one, and then we'll do it together. And again, I know I'm kind of going through this kind of fast. This is a really intricate lesson that we're trying to condense into a short amount of time. So I'll give you a couple minutes. I'll shut up and let you work, and then I'll show you how to do this one. Okay, so this one's pretty simple because it's just one step. So I'm going to jump straight into showing you what we're going to do here. So we're going to go back and we're going to add another condition to our policy. And this time we're going to the browser category again. But this time, instead of choosing the metric, we're going to choose metric baseline. And I'm going to select my entities. And again, I'm going to my FoodMe app. And I got to remember what the ask was. Let's see. Ajax response time, upper only 3 minutes. Okay. So baseline direction. So you can look at upper and lower thresholds. This time we just want to look at upper. And we want to look at the Ajax response time. And we're saying for at least 3 minutes. So we want to know if it deviates from the historical average. Only at the upper, we only want to look at the upper threshold for at least 3 minutes. And so now this time the chart on the right looks a little different than what we saw before. So it's because we're only doing upper, it's just showing us where there's sort of, here, let me show you what the difference is. If I go to upper and lower, you'll see sort of the gray has got just sort of in the middle because it's looking at the lower bound and the upper bound. And notice there's now two, because I did upper and lower, there's two little teeny tiny red stripes there. If I expand it, well, I had to go back a couple days. I say I could change this to 7 days to see what it's gonna, what it looked like over the past 7 days. But you can see there's two critical violations that would have happened here because we've only got critical. We haven't defined a warning that would have happened in that time frame. But I just want upper. So if I just look at upper only, which is what I ask you to do for this lab, there's one violation that would have triggered an alert. And there's a slider, and I mentioned on the slide to slide the slider back and forth to sort of look at the sensitivity. So I can adjust the sensitivity to say that I want fewer violations because maybe I think it's a little bit too sensitive, or maybe I don't think it's sensitive enough and I want to slide it towards more. So if I slide it towards more, now look at all I've got, 9 critical violations that would have happened in that time frame. How can you? Oh, sorry, I was reading the chat. So John was saying, how can you? Is the polling time resolution? Wait, how can you find the polling time resolution of a metric? I'm not sure I understand the question. How can you find the polling time resolution of a metric? I'm not sure I understand the question, John. Can you clarify that question for me? And while you're doing that, so I just wanted to point out that the slider is how you can adjust the sensitivity. So I'm going to slide it to, okay, maybe this one where it would have been 2 violations. So it's just deciding how sensitive are you going to be to the historical average. And again, I'm just going to name this my food Ajax response time, baseline. I was going to put the for 3 minutes. Let's just do that. And then we're going to click on create condition. Oh, the polling for the metric. Okay. Well, you know what? Let's and this is how much time do I have? Okay. Just really quickly, if once you've created a metric, there are, a condition. And actually, I don't know that you can do it for a baseline. Let me see. Actually, I don't think you can do it for a baseline. You can do it for a NERCL condition in terms of changing the polling frequency, which I'm about to, the next thing I'm going to show you is how to do NERCL conditions. I'm not sure that you can change it for a baseline condition. I'm going to turn to Phil if he's out there. Phil, do you know if we can change the polling period for a baseline? I know how we could do it for a NERCL condition. I don't know how to do it for a baseline condition. Is that even possible? Or do we have any documentation on that you know of?
I don't think it is. So by default, most of our conditions will be evaluated once per minute. But for NRQL conditions, we give you some more options to customize that. And Rachel will show you in just a minute.
Yep, I was gonna say that's actually the next slide that we're going to. So let's go there because that was the next thing that we want to do. I'm not going to read all of this to you. I know you've got the no, it's fine, John. We were actually getting there. You're just a little ahead of the you're ahead of us. No, you're fine. So again, I'm not going to read all this to you. You've got the handout, but when you can build alerts, not just based on the way that you were seeing it, where you can pick and choose specific metrics that you want to do, but if you can write a query that's going to generate a return a number, then you can create a NURCL condition. So you would write a condition that's going to return a number, and then the condition, the alert condition would be based on that returned value, and then you set a threshold around that. And when you set those thresholds, you can set a static threshold, so just a fixed number. You can set a baseline where it's going to adjust based on historical values, or you can set an outlier. So maybe you've got a group of hosts, maybe you got a NURCL condition that's looking at some, memory usage or something for a bunch of hosts. If you want to see, if one of these things is not like the other, so if you want something that's an outlier, you want to alert on that, then you would set an outlier condition. And again, I'm not going to read through all of that. I'll let you read through that on your own. Let's get to this one. So now we're going to go and create a condition using all of our great new NURCL skills that we learned previously. And to save you a little bit of time, I'm going to paste this NURCL into the chat. Just because we're running short on time, and also for my purposes, so that when I get ready to start typing, it'll go faster. But keep in mind, make sure for your app name, you replace it. Right now it says my FoodMe app name, but it should be whatever your actual FoodMe app name is. But I want you to go in and you're going to create, so when you go to create a new condition, one of the choices, actually the first choice is NURCL. So you're going to choose NURCL, and you're going to put in this NURCL statement, and then you're going to set up a static threshold. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that, and then we will do that together. Man, the time in this session is flying. I knew it was a lot to try to fit in, but I was hoping to get to the next lab, which is the last one, by the way. And I forgot to point out that this particular lab, we're using that custom data that we instrumented in our app previously. And again, even if you're working in our, actually, you know what? If you're working in the New Relic University account, we'll see when I get ready to do this along with you. I think I'm going to have to, instead of using the FoodMe app name, I think I'm going to have to use Phil's Data Nerd FoodMe app name, because the regular FoodMe app name, I don't think has any custom attributes reporting. We'll see in a second. Actually, let's do that now because we're almost out of time. So we're going to do a new condition. It's going to be NURCL. And I'm going to paste in the same query that I posted in the chat, although this is not the name of the app that I want to use. Oh, it's not going to give me autocomplete. Lovely. I'm going to have to go look up. So what was the name of your? I'm going to go look it up. I was like, what's the name of your app? Is it Data Nerd FoodMe? I'll find it. Come on. Let's see. I'm cheating. I'm going to the query my data so that I can find the. Oh, why is it not helping me?
It's Data Nerd Days FoodMe.
Oops. You know what? Edit. Did I spell it right? Yep, that's it. Okay. I'm stealing that. All right, so I'm stealing that one because I don't think the other FoodMe app is actually reporting order total as a custom attribute. Okay, so if I put that in, so this is the NURCL statement that I put in the chat, but I changed the app name to reflect the one that Phil was doing earlier. You should, if you're working in your own account, you should use the app name that you were using. And you see there's a couple of values out there. Anyway, now I forgot what were we doing? Oh, we were doing a static threshold. I lost track of what we were doing. We're going to do a static threshold where the value was greater than, because we're looking at the order total, the average order total. So we want to know if the if the query returns a value above 50. So any orders above $50, at least once in, we won't say for at least, we'll say at least once in, and I think I said 3 minutes in the lab. So we had one order that looks like it was $78.75. I'm sorry, I'm looking at Hector's question in the, can you create a NURCL or APM browser in Infra or only APM? Well, so your NURCL is whatever you can query on. So you can query on APM data. So if you wanted to write a NURCL statement that's hitting, for example, transaction or transaction error, or if you wanted one for browser, you write a NURCL statement that's hitting page view as an example. Or if you were wanting to write a NURCL alert for infrastructure, it might be against system sample or network sample or process sample. So the short answer is you can, if you can write a query to hit it, or a NURCL statement to hit it, then you can create a NURCL alert based on it.
But for your specific question, Hector, we do not usually record individual database query response times. We don't capture those by default. So doing an NRQL on database query time is going to be more challenging.
Oh, I didn't even read the end of it. I was skimming it. I missed the last part about the database. Well, I'd say for a slow database query, that I highly recommend that you take our distributed tracing course. We don't have time to get into it here, but I highly recommend.
Yep.
Like, if
you got 1 minute.
Oh gosh, really? Okay. So we do static 50 greater than 50 for 3 minutes. What else did I say in the lab? I think that was it. Oh, and then the additional settings, I wanted you to close the violation. I can't remember, where was I? Yeah, close it after 300 seconds. And then there was a question that somebody asked that I was going to answer while we were here. Oh, it was about the polling, the fine-tuning the settings in terms of the delay and the duration, the window of duration. So when you're doing a NURCL query, there's a couple of other options that you have that you don't have when you're doing APM or browser default types of alerts. So you've got a few extra options that you can do when you're doing a NURCL query. So with that, I'm going to save this condition. That's going to let me know when I've got an order total. That is, I missed something because I was running my mouth. What did I miss? Did I forget to name it? Yep, I forgot to name it. Food me total greater than 50. And I'm going to save that. And that was the NURCL condition. The last thing that I will say, yeah, thanks for answering that, Phil. So the last thing I just want to point out, there's two things. So we're not going to get to this lab. I just want to point out that, again, I mentioned there's notification channels. By default, let me show you those, but we were going to do one for a webhook, and we talked about some of those. So you would go over to notification channels, and you would click on new notification channel. And then you've got your choices there of, do you want an email? It could be Ops Genie, PagerDuty, Slack, et cetera, et cetera. If it's not something that we have listed here, then, if you've got an endpoint that you can define it as a webhook, and you can customize your payload and go do whatever you need to do there. So there's several different options. Once you create the notification channel, then it gives you an option to add it to a policy. Again, we don't have time for that one. The last thing that I want to do before we go is I want to make sure that I give you this, give you this link for our alerting best practices guide. It's a very detailed guide. And so there's a couple of points on this slide, and again, they're in the handout. if you downloaded the handout that Phil put in the chat. But I highly recommend that you go take a look at this this guide. I'm going to bring it up really quickly. It goes into a lot of detail about thinking about how you want to plan out your alerting practices, and it's very long and detailed. It's a really good document for thinking through how you want to manage your alerting with New Relic. Again, I apologize that we ran long. I tend to talk a lot. But yeah, and Phil's putting in the chat just a couple of other things. You make sure that your alerts are actionable. I talked about that at the top. So you don't necessarily just want to alert, or do you want to be woken up in the middle of the night because you got a $50 order? Probably not. So you want to make sure that it's an alert. It's something that is actionable. You want to make sure that your naming conventions are consistent and they're meaningful, so that when you're getting those notifications, they make sense. And other than that, like I say, I won't read through all of these. Definitely go take a look at the effective alerting best practices guide, the PDF that I put in the chat. That's going to give you a lot of really good information. And so with that, we're over time, but if there are any questions, anybody has any questions, I will stay for a few minutes before we've got another session and see if anybody's got any questions that they need answered. Sorry we went through that so fast, guys. It's a lot of information. You're welcome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Ooh, had a really great question from John in the chat for anybody who's still here about, is there a way to suppress the for a maintenance window? And I'm going to give you that answer really quickly. The short answer is yes, and it's muting rules. So you'll go to muting rules and you can define it based on lots of different things. You go add rule. You can set specific apps, like if you just want it for specific apps or whatever, you're like, maybe I want where my app name is or my policy name is like food me, for example. So you can turn it off for different types of things. I'm not going to do it. I don't have time for that. So you can have multiple conditions, but then you can do it based on a schedule, and you can have it repeat if you needed to repeat. You can also, if you've got a maintenance window that for whatever reason you want to turn it off, then once you've got it there, I'm not going to create this here, but once you've got it, you can enable and disable them. So muting rules is the answer to that question. Oh, looks like we got somebody who's already using muting rules. Yep. So muting rules is how you do that. And if it's active, you'll see that it's got the little active status there. Let's go peek at one of these rules and see how they've got it set up. So this is a case where we were talking about this earlier, like where you can have tags and labels. So they're tagging it where the host is equal to, or the host value is host-1. I'm not sure that's meaningful to them. I don't see a time frame in there. They just have it set up. They didn't schedule it. They just want to be able to turn it on and off at will. And so that's another reason that you can just have something where you just always turn it off for your dev apps. So maybe like you've got a staging environment where you want to test some muting rules, or you want to test some things, some alerts, and you just want to have something that you can toggle on and off. So you can just set it up without a maintenance schedule and then turn it on when you want it on and turn it, disable it when you don't want it. Cool. Awesome. Glad that's what you needed. All right, I am going to take a quick break before our next session. Phil's going to be running our next session, which is going to be talking about our synthetic monitors. Thank you all, and see you all in the next session.